The cruelest betrayals never begin with shouting. They begin with someone believing you no longer matter. The invitation rested quietly in Emily Carter's hands as the late afternoon sun slipped through the living room windows, casting long golden shadows across the hardwood floor. Thick cream-colored paper, elegant gold lettering, and two familiar names printed side by side. Ryan Brooks and Olivia Mitchell requested the honor of her presence at their wedding celebration. A slow breath escaped her lips, but her expression never changed. Outside, autumn leaves drifted across the driveway while somewhere in the neighborhood a lawnmower hummed softly beneath the clear American sky. The house remained peaceful, untouched by the storm those few words tried to awaken. She traced the edge of the envelope with her fingertips before placing it carefully on the coffee table beside a framed family photograph that had replaced every painful memory from another life. She did not need to read the invitation twice. She already understood its true purpose. Ryan had never been interested in kindness. He wanted witnesses. He wanted her to arrive carrying old wounds, while he displayed the perfect new beginning he believed he deserved. Across town, the country club where the ceremony would be held shimmered beneath white stone columns, polished fountains, and carefully trimmed gardens prepared for hundreds of guests. Workers arranged flowers beneath crystal chandeliers, while photographers tested camera angles that would capture every smile. Ryan stood near the ballroom entrance adjusting the cuff of his expensive tuxedo, as friends congratulated him on finally moving forward. Their laughter echoed through the marble hallway, but beneath his confident smile lived an uneasy curiosity. Would Emily actually come? He almost hoped she would. He imagined her arriving alone, perhaps still leaning on the cane she once carried after months of rehabilitation. He imagined polite sympathy in everyone's eyes before attention returned to him. The picture played perfectly inside his mind. Meanwhile, many miles away, Emily quietly folded a soft blanket on the living room sofa before glancing toward the front window. A sleek black sedan rolled into the driveway without unnecessary attention. The driver stepped out first before opening the rear passenger door. Benjamin Walker emerged wearing a tailored navy suit without a single logo or display of wealth. He carried himself with the effortless confidence of someone who had never needed to impress strangers. As he reached the front porch, he noticed the invitation resting inside the open envelope through the window. He entered the house with a gentle smile, set his briefcase beside the door, and asked only one question. "Is that the wedding?" Emily nodded once. There was no bitterness in her eyes, only quiet certainty. Benjamin picked up the invitation, read every word without changing his expression, then looked back at her. "Do you want to go?" She turned toward the window where amber sunlight painted the maple trees outside in brilliant shades of red and gold. For a long moment she said nothing at all. Finally, a faint smile appeared. "Yes," she answered softly. "This time, I am not walking into my past. I am walking out of it." Benjamin reached for her hand, not as someone rescuing her, but as someone choosing to stand beside her. Neither of them noticed the breeze lifting the forgotten envelope from the table before it settled quietly back into place, as if even the wind understood that some stories did not end when people walked away. They ended when those same people returned without carrying any of the pain they had once been forced to leave with. The invitation remained on the coffee table long after the evening sky turned deep blue, but neither Emily nor Benjamin mentioned it again over dinner. Instead, they spoke about ordinary things that once would have seemed impossible to Emily. A community fundraiser scheduled for the following weekend. A new rehabilitation center that Benjamin's foundation had quietly supported. The neighbor's golden retriever that insisted on chasing squirrels every morning. Their conversation moved with the easy rhythm of two people who had discovered that peace was built from simple moments, rather than dramatic promises. Yet as Emily washed the dishes later that night, the reflection in the kitchen window slowly carried her back to another house, another kitchen, and another version of herself. Years earlier, she had stood in front of a different sink wearing a faded sweatshirt, while rain tapped against the windows of the modest suburban home she had shared with Ryan Brooks. Back then, every morning had begun before sunrise because she believed building a future meant sacrificing together. She packed his lunches, encouraged him through difficult business meetings, celebrated every small promotion, and quietly postponed her own professional ambitions so he could chase his. She never counted the long hours or the opportunities she declined because love did not feel like a transaction. Then one rainy October evening, everything changed. A distracted driver ignored a traffic signal, and although Emily survived, months of surgeries and rehabilitation followed. The doctors remained hopeful, explaining that recovery would take patience, determination, and time. She accepted every painful exercise with quiet resilience, believing Ryan would stand beside her through each difficult step. During the first few weeks, he visited regularly, carrying flowers and offering reassuring smiles. But slowly, those visits became shorter. Business meetings suddenly demanded more attention. Phone calls went unanswered. Promises turned into excuses. Emily noticed the change long before she admitted it to herself. She would glance toward the rehabilitation center in trance each afternoon, hoping to see Ryan walking through the automatic doors with the familiar coffee she liked. But more often than not, only nurses and visiting families crossed the lobby. The physical therapists encouraged her to celebrate every milestone. The first time she stood without assistance for 15 seconds. The first careful steps using parallel bars. The first afternoon she walked nearly 20 feet with the support of a cane. Everyone applauded except the one person whose opinion still mattered most to her. Ryan missed every milestone. When he finally appeared after nearly 2 weeks away, he spent more time checking emails than watching her complete the exercises she had practiced for months. Emily still remembered the silence that settled between them as they sat together near the rehabilitation garden surrounded by blooming roses and gently flowing fountains. Ryan avoided her eyes before quietly saying that life had become different, that everything now felt uncertain, and that perhaps neither of them deserved to remain trapped inside circumstances they had never planned for. He never raised his voice. He never argued. His words were calm enough to sound almost reasonable, which somehow hurt even more. Emily looked down at the cane resting beside the bench and realized he was no longer speaking to the woman he had married. He was speaking to the future he no longer wanted. She nodded once, not because she agreed, but because she finally understood that love could disappear long before people admitted it aloud. Standing once again inside her present kitchen years later, Emily gently dried the last plate and placed it into the cabinet. She glanced toward the living room where Benjamin quietly read a book beneath the warm glow of a floor lamp. He looked up, smiled without asking why her eyes seemed distant, and simply held out his hand. This time, someone had noticed the woman before noticing what she carried. The following morning arrived wrapped in crisp autumn air as Emily stepped onto the front porch carrying a ceramic mug filled with hot coffee. A gentle breeze moved through the maple trees lining the quiet neighborhood street, while the first rays of sunlight reflected across dew-covered lawns. Years earlier, mornings like this had reminded her of everything she had lost. Now they reminded her how much she had rebuilt. She took a slow breath before reaching for the cane that had once represented disappointment, but had gradually become nothing more than a temporary companion on a much longer journey. Every step she had taken since the divorce had been measured in determination rather than distance. Recovery had never been a straight path. Some mornings she celebrated walking another 50 feet without stopping. Other days, simply climbing a short flight of stairs felt like conquering a mountain. The rehabilitation center became almost a second home. Therapists encouraged her without empty sympathy, reminding her that healing was not measured by speed, but by persistence. Emily learned to appreciate victories invisible to everyone else. Standing long enough to prepare breakfast. Carrying groceries from the car without asking for help. Walking through a grocery store aisle without watching every customer notice the cane first. Each quiet achievement stitched another piece of confidence back into the life she thought had disappeared forever. As months became years, she accepted a remote administrative position with a nonprofit organization that supported families facing long recoveries after medical emergencies. The work did not make headlines or earn extraordinary recognition, but every phone call allowed her to reassure someone standing exactly where she had once stood. She understood the exhaustion behind polite smiles. She recognized the silence that often followed disappointment. Without realizing it, Emily slowly became the encouragement she herself had needed. One Saturday afternoon, the organization hosted a community wellness event at a rehabilitation hospital outside the city. Volunteers welcomed families, local businesses sponsored activities, and physicians spoke about advances in long-term recovery. Emily spent the morning helping visitors register before quietly slipping away during lunch to enjoy a peaceful moment in the hospital's outdoor healing garden. Water flowed gently through a stone fountain surrounded by colorful flowers, while patients practiced walking along carefully designed pathways. Watching them reminded her that courage rarely looked dramatic. It usually looked like another ordinary person deciding not to give up today. As she sat beneath a large oak tree, she noticed an elderly veteran struggling to balance a tray while using a walker. Without hesitation, Emily stood and offered to carry his lunch to a nearby table. The man smiled with quiet gratitude, and together they crossed the garden one careful step at a time. Before she returned to her seat, another voice spoke warmly behind her. "You helped him before anyone else even noticed." Emily turned to see a tall man in a simple navy jacket and light blue dress shirt, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. There were no security guards, no expensive watch displayed for attention, no hint that he was anything more than another volunteer attending the event. His expression carried genuine kindness instead of curiosity or pity. Emily smiled politely. "Someone once helped me when I thought I would never stand on my own again," she answered. "I suppose this is my chance to return the favor." The stranger nodded thoughtfully before extending one of the coffee cups toward her. "Then perhaps you should allow someone to return the favor today." Emily accepted the cup with a quiet smile, unaware that this ordinary conversation beneath autumn leaves would become the first page of a future neither of them could yet imagine. Benjamin introduced himself with nothing more than his first name before taking a seat on the wooden bench across from Emily, allowing the afternoon sunlight filtering through the oak branches to settle naturally between them. The coffee was still warm, and the peaceful sounds of the rehabilitation garden made every conversation feel slower than the busy world beyond its gates. Emily expected the polite exchange to last only a few minutes before each of them returned to separate responsibilities, yet somehow the silence between questions never felt uncomfortable. Benjamin asked about the community event rather than her cane. He asked what inspired her to volunteer rather than what had happened to her. For the first time in years, someone seemed interested in the life she was living instead of the hardship she had survived. Emily found herself smiling more easily than she expected. She spoke about the nonprofit organization where she worked, the families she met every week, and the quiet satisfaction that came from helping strangers believe tomorrow could still become something beautiful. Benjamin listened carefully without interrupting, his attention never drifting toward his phone or the people walking nearby. When Emily apologized for talking too much, he simply laughed softly and replied that meaningful conversations had become surprisingly rare. Before either of them realized it, nearly an hour had passed beneath the colorful autumn leaves. As volunteers began cleaning tables and folding chairs across the courtyard, Benjamin stood and offered to help Emily carry several boxes filled with informational brochures back inside the hospital. She thanked him, although he insisted the boxes were far lighter than they looked. Along the hallway they greeted nurses, physicians, patients, and visitors. Many people recognized Benjamin, smiling warmly and shaking his hand, but no one mentioned titles or accomplishments. Emily assumed he must volunteer there regularly because everyone seemed genuinely happy to see him. She never noticed the quiet respect that followed him through every conversation. Outside, a light breeze carried the scent of fresh rain as dark clouds gathered beyond the parking lot. Emily reached her car just as the first drops began falling. Benjamin opened a large umbrella before she could search for hers and walked beside her across the lot without saying a word. The gesture felt simple, almost ordinary, yet it reminded her how kindness often appeared through the smallest actions. Before leaving, Benjamin handed her a business card. It contained only his name, a phone number, and an email address. There was no company logo, no impressive job title, nothing suggesting extraordinary success. "If your organization ever needs another volunteer," he said with an easy smile, "I would be glad to help." Emily thanked him and carefully placed the card inside her purse. During the following weeks they met again at additional volunteer events, neighborhood charity projects, and weekend fundraising activities. Their friendship grew naturally through shared purpose instead of grand gestures. Benjamin never spoke about wealth, investments, or business achievements. He seemed happiest planting flowers outside rehabilitation centers, carrying donated supplies into community shelters, or quietly encouraging children learning to walk with prosthetic legs. Emily admired the calm confidence that never demanded attention. She gradually realized she looked forward to every conversation they shared, although neither of them rushed to define what was quietly growing between them. Meanwhile, several miles away inside a downtown office tower, Ryan celebrated another business contract while casually mentioning to coworkers that his former wife had probably disappeared into an ordinary life after the divorce. He spoke with complete certainty because he had never once tried to discover what had truly become of her. He believed some stories simply faded away after people closed the door behind them. He had no idea that destiny had already begun writing an entirely different ending, one built not on revenge, but on unexpected grace, patient healing, and the remarkable power of being seen for exactly who you are. The seasons changed almost without Emily noticing, and somewhere between winter mornings and the first warm days of spring, life quietly became something she no longer needed to survive but could finally enjoy. The cane that had once accompanied every trip outside the house now remained near the front door more often than in her hand. Her physical therapist smiled the day Emily completed an entire mile around the rehabilitation center's walking trail without stopping. And although every muscle reminded her how much work remained, she laughed with the satisfaction of someone who understood that progress belonged to those willing to earn it one step at a time. Benjamin celebrated the milestone in the simplest way imaginable. Instead of expensive gifts or dramatic surprises, he brought takeout from her favorite neighborhood restaurant and suggested they eat beside the lake in the city park where children fed ducks and families gathered beneath blooming cherry trees. They spent hours watching sailboats drift across the calm water, while sharing stories neither of them had ever spoken aloud before. Emily admitted that after the divorce she had believed kindness always came with conditions, while Benjamin quietly confessed that years of extraordinary financial success had filled boardrooms and calendars, but had rarely introduced him to people who valued sincerity over status. Emily smiled gently, unaware that he had still never revealed the company he owned or the influence his name carried across the business world. To her, Benjamin remained the thoughtful man who remembered how she preferred her coffee, who noticed when she grew tired before she admitted it, and who listened with complete attention whenever she spoke. Their relationship unfolded with remarkable patience. There were no dramatic declarations, no attempts to erase painful memories overnight, only a growing collection of ordinary moments that slowly became extraordinary together. They explored local farmers markets on Saturday mornings, volunteered at community events on weekends, and spent quiet evenings preparing dinner while soft jazz music filled the kitchen. Benjamin never walked ahead of Emily or rushed her pace. When she occasionally reached for the cane after a difficult day, he never pretended not to notice, yet he never allowed it to define the evening either. He simply adjusted his own steps to match hers, as though walking beside her had always been the destination. One afternoon nearly 18 months after their first meeting, Benjamin invited Emily to visit a newly completed rehabilitation campus outside the city. The facility overlooked rolling green hills and sparkling ponds, filled with advanced therapy equipment, peaceful gardens, and bright classrooms designed to restore confidence as much as physical strength. As they toured the building, nurses, physicians, therapists, and administrators greeted Benjamin with unmistakable respect. Emily assumed he had become an important donor through years of volunteer work, until the executive director approached with a warm smile and thanked him for making the entire project possible. Only then did Emily quietly realize that the man beside her had not merely supported the center. He had personally funded much of its construction through his foundation. Before she could even process the revelation, the director casually mentioned Benjamin Walker's technology company, one of the largest medical innovation firms in the country, whose research had transformed rehabilitation care for thousands of patients nationwide. Emily stopped walking and looked at Benjamin with gentle disbelief. He lowered his eyes, almost sheepishly, before saying that he had wanted her to know him before she knew what he owned. Tears gathered in Emily's eyes, not because he was wealthy, but because for the first time in many years someone had trusted her heart more than his own reputation. She reached for his hand without hesitation, and beneath the warm afternoon sunlight stretching across the gardens, both of them understood that the future waiting ahead would never be measured by success alone, but by the quiet certainty that each had finally found a home in the other. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm that neither Emily nor Benjamin ever felt the need to rush. Nearly 2 years after they first met beneath the old oak tree outside the rehabilitation center, they stood together in a small chapel overlooking a quiet lake surrounded by towering pines and early summer wildflowers. There were no television cameras, no magazine photographers, and no extravagant guest list filled with strangers. The ceremony included only close friends, a handful of family members, several nurses and therapists who had witnessed Emily's recovery, and the elderly veteran she had helped carry lunch on the afternoon that had unknowingly changed both of their lives forever. As soft piano music drifted through the open windows, Emily walked confidently down the aisle without reaching for the cane that had once rarely left her side. Each step felt calm, steady, and certain. Benjamin waited with the same gentle smile she had first noticed years earlier, a smile that had never promised to rescue her, but had quietly reminded her that she had never needed rescuing in the first place. Their vows spoke less about perfect futures than about ordinary mornings, patient listening, shared burdens, and choosing one another every single day. When the ceremony ended, guests gathered outside beneath bright blue skies where children chased bubbles across the grass while friends laughed around long wooden tables decorated with fresh flowers gathered from local gardens. It felt less like an extravagant celebration, and more like the peaceful beginning of a life that had already been built through countless quiet acts of kindness. Months passed, and the beautiful simplicity of their marriage continued unchanged despite Benjamin's extraordinary success. Their home became a place where business conversations often gave way to homemade dinners, neighborhood walks, charity planning meetings, and evenings spent reading together beside the fireplace. Emily continued working with the nonprofit organization because she refused to let financial security replace personal purpose. Benjamin admired that decision more than any professional achievement. He often said that the greatest investments were measured in lives improved rather than numbers printed on annual reports. Together they expanded rehabilitation programs into underserved communities, funded scholarships for physical therapists, and quietly paid medical expenses for families facing impossible choices, never seeking recognition for any of it. Meanwhile, Ryan's life appeared increasingly successful from the outside. His social media pages displayed expensive vacations, luxury restaurants, designer suits, and smiling photographs with Olivia. Friends congratulated him on building the perfect life after his divorce, and he accepted every compliment without hesitation. Yet behind closed office doors another reality slowly unfolded. His company struggled to compete for larger contracts, and executives frequently discuss one influential technology corporation, whose innovations continued reshaping the medical industry nationwide. Ryan often remarked that earning a partnership with its founder would transform his entire business. He studied interviews, followed industry news, and searched for opportunities to gain an introduction, but the company's leadership remained remarkably private. The founder rarely attended public events unless they involved charitable work, and photographs seldom revealed much beyond brief appearances at healthcare conferences. Ryan assumed that one day persistence would finally place him in the right room at the right moment. He never imagined that destiny had already connected his life to that opportunity long before he even recognized it. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon as sunlight streamed across the dining room table inside Emily and Benjamin's home, the mail arrived with its usual collection of bills, newsletters, and advertisements. Resting among them was another elegant cream-colored envelope trimmed with gold. Emily immediately recognized Ryan's handwriting before opening it. Inside rested a formal invitation requesting the pleasure of her company at his upcoming wedding reception, accompanied by a handwritten note expressing hope that enough time had passed for everyone to celebrate new beginnings together. Emily silently placed the invitation on the table before looking toward Benjamin, who read the note carefully without a trace of anger. He simply folded it closed, met her eyes with complete calm, and asked the same question he had asked once before, only now it carried a deeper meaning. "Would you like us to go together?" Emily looked at Benjamin for only a moment before answering with complete certainty. "Yes," she said quietly, "but I do not want to go because of who they are. I want to go because of who I have become." Benjamin smiled with the same calm warmth that had carried her through every uncertain season. There was no discussion about making an entrance, proving a point, or reminding anyone of what had happened years earlier. They agreed to attend for one reason only. Emily would never allow fear to decide where she belonged again. During the following week, life continued exactly as it always had. Emily spent her mornings meeting with families through the nonprofit organization, reviewing recovery programs, and organizing volunteers for an upcoming charity walk benefiting patients adjusting to life after serious injuries. Benjamin traveled briefly for business meetings before returning home each evening in time to prepare dinner beside her. Their conversations rarely mentioned the upcoming wedding. Instead, they laughed over new recipes that occasionally failed, planned another rehabilitation scholarship, and discussed where they might spend a quiet weekend once summer arrived. The invitation remained tucked inside a small drawer near the kitchen, almost forgotten. Yet hundreds of miles away, preparations for Ryan and Olivia's wedding reception grew more elaborate each day. The country club transformed into a showcase of luxury with imported flowers, polished marble floors reflecting crystal chandeliers, and elegant dining tables prepared for executives, investors, and influential business leaders. Ryan viewed every detail with satisfaction. He believed this evening would represent everything he had worked to achieve since rebuilding his life. During one planning meeting, he casually mentioned to Olivia that he had invited Emily. Olivia looked surprised before asking why. Ryan shrugged with a confident smile and replied that enough time had passed for everyone to move forward. Secretly, however, another thought remained hidden beneath his easy tone. He wanted Emily to witness how successful his life had become. Somewhere deep inside himself, he still expected to see admiration, regret, or perhaps quiet sadness reflected in her eyes. He never considered the possibility that none of those emotions remained. The morning of the reception arrived beneath a cloudless blue sky stretching endlessly across the countryside. Emily stood inside her bedroom adjusting a simple but elegant ivory dress that reflected quiet confidence rather than extravagance. She studied her reflection for several seconds. The woman looking back at her stood with relaxed shoulders and steady posture. There was no cane resting beside the dresser. No hesitation clouded her expression. The scars life had left behind were no longer visible in the way she carried herself. Benjamin entered wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit and smiled, as though he were seeing her for the first time again. "You look happy," he said softly. Emily laughed. "That is because I am." He offered his arm, and together they walked downstairs where sunlight poured through wide windows across polished hardwood floors. Outside, a black luxury sedan waited quietly at the front entrance. There were no flashing cameras or unnecessary attention. Everything about the morning reflected the life they had intentionally built together: graceful, private, and peaceful. As the car traveled through winding country roads lined with green fields and tall oak trees, Emily watched the scenery pass without speaking. Benjamin gently reached across the center console and held her hand. He did not ask whether she was nervous because he already understood that courage was not the absence of difficult memories. Courage was deciding those memories no longer controlled the next chapter. At that same moment, guests began arriving at the country club in elegant attire while soft string music floated through the grand entrance. Ryan greeted executives with polished confidence, shaking hands and exchanging business cards, never realizing that within the next hour the opportunity he had spent years chasing would step through those very doors beside the woman he had once believed would never rise again. The black sedan rolled slowly beneath the towering stone entrance of the country club, as late afternoon sunlight reflected across polished windows and carefully trimmed gardens. A valet opened the door, but for several quiet seconds neither Emily nor Benjamin stepped out. Emily looked toward the elegant building where another version of her life had once been expected to end in humiliation. Instead, she felt only gratitude. Benjamin gently squeezed her hand before they walked forward together with calm confidence, matching each other's pace without saying a word. Conversations inside the grand reception hall continued as crystal glasses clinked softly beneath enormous chandeliers. Guests admired floral arrangements, sampled appetizers, and exchanged business introductions while a string quartet performed near the marble staircase. Ryan stood near the ballroom entrance greeting arriving guests with practiced confidence, convinced every important executive worth knowing had already appeared. Then the room slowly grew quieter. Heads turned toward the entrance one after another, not because anyone recognized Emily at first, but because the couple walking through the doors carried themselves with effortless composure that never asked for attention yet naturally received it. Emily wore a graceful ivory evening dress with understated elegance. Benjamin walked beside her in a perfectly tailored navy suit, neither hurried nor theatrical, simply present. Ryan's smile faded for a fraction of a second as recognition crossed his face. He had imagined many versions of this meeting during the previous weeks, but none looked like the woman now calmly approaching the reception desk. Emily greeted the hostess with a warm smile, signed the guest book, and quietly thanked her before accepting 2 programs. There was no hesitation in her movements, no trace of uncertainty, and certainly no cane. Olivia noticed Ryan staring toward the entrance and followed his gaze. She leaned closer with polite curiosity. "Is that Emily?" she whispered. Ryan nodded almost absent-mindedly, unable to reconcile the memory he had preserved with the woman standing only a few yards away. Emily looked healthier, happier, and somehow lighter than he had ever seen her during their marriage. Before Ryan gathered himself enough to walk over, another unexpected moment interrupted the room. Richard Collins, Chief Executive Officer of one of the nation's largest healthcare systems, and one of the evening's most respected guests, entered through a side corridor. Ryan immediately prepared to introduce himself, hoping once again to build the professional connection he had pursued for years. Instead, Richard walked directly past him with a broad smile that surprised everyone nearby. Extending both hands warmly, he greeted Benjamin first. "Benjamin, I was hoping you would make it," Richard said sincerely. "The new rehabilitation campus has exceeded every expectation. Thousands of families are already benefiting because of your vision." Several executives nearby immediately joined the conversation, each greeting Benjamin with unmistakable respect. One thanked him for funding advanced medical research. Another congratulated him on his company's latest innovation transforming rehabilitation technology across the country. A third introduced his family, explaining that Benjamin's foundation had quietly covered treatment costs for his daughter several years earlier. Emily stood comfortably beside him, receiving genuine smiles as though she had long belonged within this circle. Ryan remained frozen only a few feet away. Every company he had spent years studying, every executive he had hoped to impress, every opportunity he believed remained beyond reach, all seemed connected through the man standing beside the woman he had once dismissed as someone with no future. Benjamin never mentioned his achievements himself. He simply introduced Emily with quiet pride. "This is my wife." The words were gentle, uncomplicated, and completely sincere. Emily smiled graciously at each person she met, never searching the room for Ryan, never waiting for his reaction, because the life she had built no longer required validation from the one she had left behind. Only then did Ryan fully understand that while he had spent years chasing success, Emily had quietly discovered something far greater, a life where dignity, kindness, and love had become the true measure of wealth. The reception continued with polished speeches, elegant music, and the gentle rhythm of conversations flowing beneath sparkling chandeliers, yet Ryan heard almost none of it. His attention remained fixed on Emily and Benjamin as they spoke naturally with physicians, business leaders, nonprofit directors, and longtime friends who greeted them with genuine affection, rather than calculated admiration. There was something quietly remarkable about the way people approached Benjamin. No one seemed intimidated by his success. They simply respected the kindness they had personally experienced. More than once Ryan overheard stories of scholarship programs, rehabilitation centers, and medical research projects that Benjamin had funded without attaching his name to any of them. Every conversation revealed another piece of a man Ryan had spent years trying unsuccessfully to meet, never realizing destiny had already placed that opportunity directly in front of him through the woman he had chosen to leave behind. Eventually, Emily and Benjamin crossed paths with Ryan near one of the ballroom windows overlooking the gardens where evening sunlight slowly faded into a warm golden horizon. For a brief moment, the noise around them seemed to soften. Ryan managed a polite smile that felt far less confident than the one he had rehearsed in his imagination. He congratulated Emily on how well she looked and complimented Benjamin on his accomplishments. His words were courteous, but they carried the unmistakable weight of someone confronting the distance between expectation and reality. Emily thanked him sincerely, her voice calm and free from resentment. She asked about his work, wished him and Olivia a happy future together, and spoke with the same grace she offered every other guest that evening. There was no hidden sarcasm waiting beneath her kindness, no carefully prepared speech about the past, and no desire to reopen old wounds. Ryan had expected disappointment, anger, or even quiet satisfaction. Instead, he encountered something he had never anticipated: complete peace. It became painfully clear that Emily had not come to prove anything. She had simply come because the past no longer held power over her present. Benjamin gently rested his hand in hers, not as a gesture meant for others to witness, but as naturally as breathing. They excused themselves with warm smiles before walking toward the terrace where cool evening air drifted across the gardens. Behind them, the celebration continued exactly as planned, yet somehow everything felt different. Ryan remained standing near the window, watching the couple disappear beneath rows of softly illuminated trees. Olivia quietly joined him without speaking for several moments. Finally, she asked whether he was all right. Ryan nodded automatically, but his eyes never left the path outside. For the first time in many years, he understood that success could never be measured by appearances alone. Expensive suits, impressive receptions, and ambitious goals suddenly seemed strangely incomplete compared with the quiet confidence Emily now carried. He realized that the greatest mistake of his life had not been underestimating her recovery. It had been failing to recognize her worth long before any hardship entered their marriage. Outside, Emily and Benjamin walked slowly toward their waiting car as stars gradually appeared across the clear night sky. A gentle breeze carried the fragrance of blooming flowers through the peaceful gardens, while distant laughter floated from the ballroom behind them. Emily paused. For one final glance at the beautifully lit building, not with sadness but with gratitude. Years earlier she had believed losing everything meant the end of her story. Now she understood that it had simply been the beginning of the chapter where she finally discovered herself. Benjamin smiled as she slipped her hand into his, and together they continued forward without looking back. The car quietly disappeared beyond the entrance gates, while the lights of the country club slowly faded into the distance. Emily had never returned to reclaim the life she once lost. She had returned only long enough to realize that she no longer needed it. The most beautiful victory had never been making someone regret leaving her. It had been building a life so full of purpose, dignity, and love that the past could no longer reach her. Quietly, completely, and forever she had chosen herself.